Eli Cole was born into silence. Not the gentle kind, not the peaceful kind people talk about when they say they enjoy being alone. This was the kind of silence that feels wrong, heavy, suffocating, permanent. From the moment Eli entered the world, he never heard a sound. Not the frantic voices of doctors rushing around the delivery room, not the alarms, not the chaos, not even his own cry. And that cry, if it came at all, was swallowed by tragedy before it ever mattered. Because the same day Eli was born, his mother, Alina Cole, died. Complications during childbirth, they said. Too much blood, too little time. Clinical words that did nothing to explain how a woman could be alive one moment and gone the next. Nathan Cole held her hand as it happened. He watched the color leave her face. He saw her lips move, trying to say something he would never hear, and neither would their son. In a single hour, Nathan lost his wife, and Eli lost the only voice he was ever meant to hear first. Doctors soon delivered the second blow. They ran tests, then more. Long conversations in sterile rooms, gentle voices, careful pauses. Finally, the verdict. Eli was deaf, congenital, permanent, no cure, no treatment, no hope. Nathan didn't scream, didn't cry. He just nodded like a man signing a contract he didn't read and walked out carrying a baby who would never hear him say, "I'm sorry your mother isn't here." Nathan Cole was a billionaire. Power, influence, resources beyond imagination. He had built empires from nothing. He was used to fixing problems by throwing money at them until they disappeared. So he refused to accept this one. For the next 8 years, Nathan chased a miracle. Johns Hopkins, Zurich, Tokyo, private clinics hidden behind mountains, specialists who charged more per hour than most people earned in a month, machines that hummed and scanned, charts, diagnoses, promises wrapped in expensive language. Everywhere he went, the answer was the same. Irreversible, incurable, accept it. But Nathan couldn't accept it. Because Eli wasn't just his son. Eli was all he had left. The Cole estate reflected that loss. It sprawled across acres of perfectly trimmed land, a masterpiece of wealth and precision. Marble floors polished until they reflected your face, chandeliers that sparkled under natural light, art that belonged in museums. Yet, inside, the house felt dead. No music, no television, no laughter. Servants spoke in whispers. Footsteps were soft, careful, as if sound itself was forbidden. Nathan believed he was protecting his son. Why fill the house with noises Eli could never hear? But what he really built was a shrine to grief. Silence wasn't kindness. Silence was surrender. Eli grew up in that silence. He sat alone with his toys, lining them up in perfect rows. Airplanes, cars, puzzles he completed without help. He learned early that the world didn't wait for him, that people talked around him, not to him. But his father loved him deeply, but from a distance, like a man afraid to touch something already broken. And there was something else, something no one paid attention to anymore. Eli kept touching his right ear. Just a small movement, almost unconscious, a rub, a press, sometimes a flinch, sometimes a wince. The kind of thing doctors had seen too many times to care about. The kind of thing staff assumed was just a habit. But it wasn't a habit. It was pain. Pain that lived quietly inside a child who had never learned how to complain. Pain that went unnoticed because everyone had already decided nothing could be done. Nathan didn't see it. The doctors didn't see it. The house didn't see it. And so the silence continued. Unbroken, unquestioned, until one day, someone finally looked. Ruth Miller arrived at the gates of the Cole mansion on a gray October morning, gripping her worn-out bag like it was the last thing tethering her to hope. She wasn't thinking about the size of the estate. She wasn't impressed by the iron gates or the endless stretch of land. All she could think about was her grandmother. 3 months behind on payments. That's what the letter said. If Ruth didn't come up with the money soon, the nursing home would transfer her grandmother to a state facility, the kind of place where people stopped being names and started being room numbers. The kind of place where no one had time to sit with you when you were scared. Ruth couldn't let that happen. That woman had raised her after her parents died, had prayed over her, protected her, loved her when the world didn't. So Ruth took the job. She didn't come as a dreamer. She came as a survivor. 27 years old, no college degree, no connections, just exhaustion, quiet faith, and a desperate need to keep someone she loved from being forgotten. From the moment she stepped inside the mansion, Ruth felt it. Something was wrong. Not broken glass, not disorder, not chaos. The house was too perfect. The floors gleamed, the air smelled clean, everything was in its place, but the silence pressed against her ears like pressure under water. It wasn't peaceful, it wasn't calm. It was tense. Servants moved carefully like they were afraid of being heard. Conversations died the moment someone entered a room. No one laughed, no one lingered. Even the walls felt like they were listening. Then Ruth saw him. A small boy sitting alone on the marble staircase. He was arranging toy airplanes in a perfect line, each one facing the same direction. He didn't look up when footsteps passed him, didn't react to movement, didn't acknowledge the world. But Ruth noticed something else. His hand. Every few seconds, his fingers brushed his right ear, not aggressively, not obviously, just enough to notice, if you were paying attention. And each time he did it, his face tightened, just for a moment, a flicker of discomfort, pain quickly buried. Ruth's chest tightened. She'd seen that look before. But she said nothing. She kept walking, because in houses like this, people like her weren't paid to notice children. They were paid to disappear. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Whitmore, wasted no time making that clear. Her posture was rigid, her voice sharp. Her eyes scanned Ruth like a list of potential problems. "You clean, you stay quiet, you don't interfere," she said flatly. "And under no circumstances do you get close to the boy." Ruth nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Whitmore leaned closer. The last girl thought she could help, thought she could make a difference. She was gone in a week, no reference. That was the warning. In this house, caring had consequences. So Ruth did what she was told. She cleaned floors, polished railings, folded linens. She kept her head down and her mouth shut. But she couldn't stop watching. Every day she saw the same routine. The boy, Eli, sat alone, always alone. While the house buzzed quietly around him, his world stayed small and sealed. He played without sound, without interruption, without comfort. And always, the ear, the touching, the wincing, the silence that didn't feel natural. This wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence of endurance. Ruth started to realize something unsettling. Everyone else had learned to ignore him. The staff avoided him, not out of cruelty, but fear. Fear of attachment, fear of blame, fear of crossing lines they didn't make but were forced to obey. Even his father walked past him sometimes without stopping, not because he didn't love his son, but because love hurt too much when it came with helplessness. Ruth understood that pain. She had lived it. And that's when the thought crept in, quiet, dangerous, impossible to ignore. What if everyone was wrong? What if the silence wasn't permanent? What if the problem wasn't that the boy couldn't hear, but that no one was really looking? Ruth pushed the thought away. She needed this job. She needed the money. She couldn't afford to hope. Because in this house, hope wasn't just fragile. Hope was forbidden. And yet, without realizing it, Ruth had already become the most dangerous person in the mansion. Not because she was powerful, not because she was trained, but because she was watching when no one else was. The bond between Ruth and Eli wasn't planned. It wasn't spoken about, and it definitely wasn't allowed. It happened quietly, so quietly that no one noticed it forming. Ruth never broke the rules openly. She didn't sit beside Eli for long, didn't draw attention, didn't act like she was helping. Instead, she did small things, invisible things, the kind of things that slipped between the cracks of a house built on control. She left a folded paper bird on the staircase one morning, just a simple shape made from scrap paper. No note, no explanation. When she passed by later, the bird was gone. The next day, she found something in its place, a drawing. Crude lines, an airplane with wings too big and windows too small. But it was unmistakably meant for her. Ruth felt her throat tighten. That was the moment she understood something important. Eli had noticed her too. From then on, they developed their own quiet language. Not the formal signs his tutors taught him, but personal ones. A tap of the chest meant happy. A slow blink meant thank you. A pressed palm meant stay. And Ruth stayed. For the first time in his life, Eli felt something he couldn't name but desperately needed. Safety. He smiled more around her, just small smiles, careful smiles, like he didn't trust them to last. And Ruth noticed something else. The ear. Whenever Eli relaxed, the touching stopped. But whenever he was stressed, overwhelmed, or alone for too long, his hand went back to his right ear, pressing, rubbing, sometimes flinching like a sharp pain had sparked deep inside. This wasn't random. This was his body asking for help. One morning, everything changed. Ruth was sweeping near the garden doors when she felt it. Something wrong. A tension she couldn't explain. She followed the instinct outside. That's when she saw him. Eli was curled up on a stone bench, knees pulled tight to his chest. Both hands were pressed against his right ear. His face was twisted in agony, but there was no sound. His mouth was open, his body shook, tears streamed down his face. He was screaming, silently. Ruth dropped the broom and ran to him. She knelt, her hands hovering, unsure, afraid to scare him. Eli looked up at her, eyes red and desperate. He signed frantically, "Pain, pain, pain." Ruth swallowed hard. She signed slowly, carefully, "Can I look?" Eli hesitated. Every doctor he'd ever known had hurt him. Needles, scans, cold tools, promises that ended in pain. His whole body screamed no. But then he looked at Ruth and nodded. She tilted his head gently toward the sunlight, and that's when her heart stopped. Deep inside his ear canal was something dark, dense, hardened. Not shadow, not wax, something solid, something that didn't belong there. It was unmistakable, and it was visible. Ruth's breath caught. Her mind raced. How could this be here? How could something so obvious be missed? Then a memory slammed into her. Her cousin, Caleb. 6 years deaf, 6 years of doctors shrugging, 6 years of being told nothing could be done, until one doctor finally looked closely enough. A blockage, simple, removed in minutes. His world exploded into sound. Ruth's hands began to shake. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't fate. This was negligence. A terrifying realization settled in her chest. What if Eli was never incurable? What if the silence that defined his entire life wasn't permanent at all? The thought made her dizzy, because if she was right, everything changed. And if she was wrong, everything ended. Ruth pulled back slowly, signing reassurance to Eli, holding him until his breathing calmed. Inside, panic raged. If she told Nathan, he'd call the doctors. The same doctors who'd missed this for years. The same ones who'd hurt the boy again and again. Eli would be strapped to tables, poked,
tested, ignored. But if she said nothing, Eli would keep living in pain, in silence, in a prison built by other people's certainty. Ruth sat awake that night, staring at the ceiling. The image burned into her mind. The dark mass, the silent scream, the trust in Eli's eyes. She understood the cost now. This wasn't just about a job anymore. This was about a choice. Interfere and lose everything. Stay silent and betray a child who trusted her. Ruth didn't sleep, because once you see the truth, you can never unsee it. And she knew one thing for certain. Everyone else had missed it, but she hadn't.
Nathan Cole left the mansion just after sunrise. A routine business trip, a private jet waiting on the runway, another deal that couldn't be postponed. He kissed his son's forehead, unaware that he was leaving behind the most fragile moment of Eli's life. The house exhaled when he was gone. That same heavy silence settled back into place. Ruth tried to go about her duties like any other day, folding linens, wiping counters, moving through hallways that felt narrower than before. Her hands shook no matter how hard she tried to steady them, because she knew something was coming. And then she heard it, a dull thud, not loud, not dramatic, just wrong. Ruth froze. Another sound followed, soft, uneven movement against the floor. She dropped what she was holding and ran toward the noise. Eli was lying on the hallway rug, curled in on himself, knees tight to his chest, both hands pressed hard against his right ear. His face was twisted in agony, tears streaming down his cheeks. But there was still no sound. He was crying the way he always did, in complete silence. Ruth dropped to her knees beside him. Her chest felt tight, her thoughts scattered. She signed his name over and over, trying to ground him. Eli's body shook violently. The pain was worse than before, stronger, louder, even without sound. Ruth didn't hesitate anymore. She knew this was the moment. Her mind flashed backward, years earlier, to a small hospital room and her younger brother Jonah, 12 years old, pale, complaining of pain no one took seriously. Doctors said to wait, said it wasn't urgent, said boys exaggerate. They waited, and Jonah died in her arms. Ruth remembered promising herself that day, promising God that she would never again stand by while a child suffered just because it was inconvenient to act. Her hands trembled as she gently tilted Eli's head toward the light. The blockage was unmistakable now, dark, swollen, pressing painfully against his ear canal. This wasn't theory anymore. This wasn't suspicion. This was reality. Ruth's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She looked at Eli. He looked back at her, terrified, trusting, desperate. She signed slowly, "I won't hurt you." He hesitated, then nodded. That nod was everything. Ruth reached into her pocket and pulled out the sterilized tweezers she had carried for days, praying she'd never need them. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She whispered a prayer under her breath. "God, guide my hands, please." She moved carefully, slowly, gently. The tweezers slipped into the ear canal. Her hand shook. She felt resistance. Her stomach dropped. She paused, adjusted, pulled again, steadier this time. Something moved. Then slowly, it came free. A dark, heavy mass slid out and dropped into her palm. Years of neglect, years of pain, years of silence. Ruth stared at it, stunned. And then, Eli gasped. A sharp, audible breath tore from his chest. Ruth froze. Eli's eyes went wide. He slapped his hand over his ear, then pulled it away like he'd been burned. He looked around wildly. His head snapped toward the hallway, toward the grandfather clock. Tick, tick, tick. His mouth opened. A sound came out, rough, broken, untrained, but real. Dad?
Ruth's breath caught in her throat as tears poured down her face. Eli touched his own throat, feeling the vibration of his voice like it was magic. He laughed, an unsteady, startled sound, and then cried again, this time loudly. The silence that had ruled the mansion for 8 years shattered in seconds. Ruth pulled him into her arms, sobbing. "You can hear. You can hear." Eli clung to her, overwhelmed by sound, his breath, her voice, the ticking clock, the rush of the world finally breaking in. For the first time in his life, Eli Cole was not alone in silence. But Ruth knew something else too. This miracle came with a cost, and it was about to be paid.
Nathan Cole returned to a house that no longer felt familiar. The silence was gone, not replaced by peace, but by chaos. Security rushed through the hallways, voices overlapped, orders were shouted, and at the center of it all stood Ruth Miller, her hands stained with blood, her face pale, her body shaking. Nathan didn't ask questions. Fear doesn't wait for explanations. He saw the tweezers, he saw the blood, and all he could think was that someone had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. "Get her away from my son!" he barked. Guards grabbed Ruth by the arms. She didn't resist, she didn't cry, she didn't beg. She only turned her head, searching the hallway for Eli. And that's when it happened. "Dad." The word was rough, unpolished, shaky, but it was real. Nathan froze. The sound cut through him like glass. Slowly, he turned. Eli stood there, small hands clenched at his sides, eyes wide, not afraid, but overwhelmed. He swallowed, steadying himself, and spoke again. "I can hear you." Nathan's knees buckled. The world tilted. 8 years of silence collapsed into that single sentence. He crossed the room in a daze, dropping to his knees in front of his son, gripping Eli's shoulders as if afraid he might disappear. You can hear me?" Nathan whispered. Eli nodded. Tears streamed down his face. "Your voice," he said softly. "It's loud." Nathan pulled him into his chest and broke down. Not quietly, not with dignity. He cried the way men do when everything they believed has been ripped open. Only then did he look at Ruth again. Really look. At the trembling woman who hadn't tried to run, who hadn't tried to explain, who had simply stood there, ready to be punished for doing the unthinkable. They took Eli to the hospital that night. Doctors swarmed, tests were run, scans reviewed. Nathan paced the halls, heart pounding, waiting for someone, anyone, to tell him this was a mistake. But the truth came faster than he expected. A doctor sat him down with a file. Old scans, years old, highlighted, annotated. There it was. A dense obstruction noted in the right ear canal. Recommendation, immediate removal. Nathan stared at the page. His hands began to shake. "Is someone saw this?" he asked. The doctor nodded. "Yes." "Then why wasn't it removed?" Silence. The kind that finally speaks. Nathan understood. The endless appointments, the ongoing treatments, the constant hope dangled just out of reach. His son's condition hadn't just been misdiagnosed. It had been monetized. Eli wasn't cured because curing him would end the income stream. Nathan felt sick. His money, the very thing he believed would save his son, had kept him trapped in silence. He left the hospital room without a word and walked straight to security. Ruth was sitting alone, hands folded, head bowed. She wasn't praying for herself. She was praying for Eli. Nathan stopped in front of her. Then he did something no one expected. He dropped to his knees. "I'm sorry," he said, breaking. "I trusted money. I trusted titles. I trusted people who looked important." Tears fell freely now. "And I didn't trust you." Ruth tried to speak, but he raised a hand. "You saw my son," he continued. You saw his pain when I couldn't, when no one else would." He looked up at her, eyes red, hollow, grateful. "I tried to buy a miracle, and God sent one through the woman I hired to clean my floors." They went back to Eli together. The boy sat on the hospital bed, headphones on, listening to music for the first time. When he saw Ruth, he ripped them off and ran to her. "Thank you," he said. 2 simple words, the first words of a life finally heard. Nathan watched them, his heart forever changed. He learned the lesson that night, the one money couldn't protect him from, that miracles don't come from power, they come from people who care enough to pay attention. And sometimes, the ones who save us are the ones we were never taught to see. Like and subscribe for more videos like this.